Hello and welcome to part 4 of my summary of Harlan Ellison's Deathbird Stories, an anthology book. These are 4 of the last short stories in the book, and these are some of the best. These are absolutely brilliant. Most of the book is brilliant anyway. Some of them are controversial to you, some of them could be disgusting, boring, whatever, but these ones really stick out. And I guess you could say he saved the best for last, but the order upon which they are also explains why they're the last ones. So let's go through the first one. It's called Ernest and the Machine God. And this is a story about another woman, definitely a femme fatale, who is influencing a bunch of people. And you could argue it's not too different in concept from The Face of Helen Bourneau. It plays around with the idea of a person who's been conning, manipulating others, using their looks and their brain to upstage less intelligent people. And it's finally caught up with her, and it's caught up with her in 2 ways. In the practical sense, there's a guy who's actually been chasing her, and in the supernatural sense, which we sort of fall into. So it's just not exactly in the way you think. Now, Harlan does something interesting with the first page where he lists various elements like the night, the road, the fear, the car. Like it's some kind of comic book or a movie with hard cuts. This is cool. I like this technique. It's cutting straight to the chase, and then the story just sort of slows down, kind of like a Quentin Tarantino movie. The pacing doesn't suffer, though. It goes from a contemporary to one of fantasy story over trying to use her feminine charms to control others, and then that supernatural just sort of bumps in there, and the god in power isn't too happy about what she's doing. It's a much more believable and easier to read story than some of the others we came across. It's a bit strange, and then it leaves so much more to tell. It does have an ending. It does complete itself, but there's something missing that I either want to read more, or maybe there should have been more. Maybe there's some element I wasn't quite attuned with, or maybe Harlan could have done a series of these stories. Who knows? This is all interesting stuff because nearly all of these stories an average reader might want to read a sequel or maybe a serial. Now, Harlan just gave you this tasty morsel of a story. It makes you go, what is this thing? But not as questionable as some of his other stuff. Okay, here we get to the top 3, or the last 3. These are probably not necessarily my favorite, but they're just written so well, and the ideas lend themselves to so many more ideas that your imagination just keeps rolling with them. And this one's called Rock God. Now, Rock in the story is a literal god of literal rock, and his awakening is coming about. So we start off with this ancient ritual from long ago where this god is telling his followers he's going to sleep for a long time. And there's all the rocks of him that are part of his body that end up getting scattered throughout the land and throughout the time that he's sleeping. So this is kind of like a mystical, archaeological Indiana Jones style setup, but instead of focusing on one hero character, it's like the premise is to tell a much bigger story. So there are these 7 stones of power and 1 soul stone or what have you, and they're scattered throughout the world, and he explains them in actual mythological and historical references like Stonehenge and Arthurian legend, King Solomon. There's all kinds. So some of these stones are passed through people over the ages through hands. Some of them have powers because they're holding onto them, and they have their own adventures and legends about them. He doesn't really go into too much detail, though, until we finally get to present day, where we find a corrupt building foreman who's been skimping on materials and making profit from a high-rise he's been constructing. Now, this is a rather curious setup for a story, and it sort of leaves you hanging as a premise for a continued story. This is one of those beauties of short stories, especially by Harlan, that it makes you want to know more. It makes you want to read more, and your imagination, you're trying to say what happens next in your brain as the story ends. It's such a beautiful example of that. And you can't really do that with a novella or novels. And I don't mean just because he drops it or cuts it, as novels and novellas are fully fleshed out. So in this short story, you just sort of want to keep reading more, and you end up reading more Harlan and his other short stories to see any other crazy ideas he might come up with. All right, the next story is called, this is a long one, Adrift just off the the islets, or the islets of Langerhans, latitude 38 degrees, 54 north, longitude 77 degrees, 0013 west. Now, this won 2 awards, the Hugo and the Locus Award for Best Novelette back in 1975. How to characterize this? This is kind of like you have pastiches from Kafka, from Melville. There's Shodmak, there's Shelley, and of course Asimov. So think of a story of a man who wants to die, and he can't. So he has to locate the literal, physical representation of his soul. And to do so, he has to go check out Victor Frankenstein. He goes through this crazy, trippy experience with plenty of techno jargon to keep your brain sort of plowing through this thing. It has this series of weird, clandestine, magical organizations. There's a scientific one. There's a retelling of what the CERN Hadron Collider was all about. And then, of course, you have the crazy, surrealistic dreamscape persona expanded upon analogy world that happens near the ending. It's very trippy. And it's such a combination of things in this story coming at you. It's this beautiful, weird, magical experience. There's this crazy ending. And it works in some weird part of your brain with all these things happening. And like you have the logic, you have the science, you have the boundaries, then you have the magical, mystical, and then you get into the surrealistic. It's one of those gems in this anthology that makes you go, wow, I think a lot of people are really going to like this. I mean, the people will go like, what the hell was that about? But not in comparison to these previous stories, which were just too surrealistic or too weird. This has just enough crazy to not be completely confusing, and just enough avant-garde levels of surrealism to allow Harlan to explore his ideas a bit deeper. This is why this story is so good on how it balances so many elements out. Okay, and here we come to the title piece, The Deathbird. This also won the 1974 Hugo Award for Best Novelette and the Locus Award for Best Short Story. Now, Harlan has won dozens, if not hundreds, of these kinds of awards over the years, so he knows what he's doing, and the Hugo Award is special because that's based off other writers, so they know what they're talking about when they give out these awards. So this is The Deathbird, and Harlan goes straight into the Garden of Eden setting and sort of turns it on its head. It's an allegorical story. It has this beautiful meta-narrative where Harlan is literally the narrator, and he is telling you to take notes because a test is coming up. And he does Bible quotes, he breaks the fourth wall, he writes you a quiz you have to answer throughout the story. He just goes nuts, and this is beautiful. He puts your brain and heart and just spins it around. It's crazy. It's like, I'd say it's like nothing you've ever read before. I mean, it's not that ridiculous, but it's such, the fourth wall is just constantly being broken and coming back. It's just, whoa, what's going on? And throughout that, there are these other vignettes throughout the story as we see the incarnation of the protagonist as he changes over the years. It reminds me of that Robin Williams movie where he plays the same character, but they change over the years or over the ages. I think if you're a gamer and you know Planescape Torment, and if you don't know my channel, I am big on stories, and Planescape Torment is one of the most beautiful stories in video gaming history. I would say the Deathbird and the Adrift story are very close to that game's setup in many, many respects. And I would have to say that Deathbird specifically, but I'd say the anthology in general, is one of those books or one of those stories you just have to read. And if you do ever pick up this book or find it perchance, whether you're a casual reader, an aspiring author, there's no way these stories will influence you. They are so memorable, you'll be thinking about them decades later. You'll probably go back and reread them and have this great experience. You'll see some things you missed. These stories are visceral, they're honest, and they're fast. They're coming at you very quickly. So that's Harlan Ellison, and I think after this, if you do read his stuff, you're gonna get addicted. You're gonna keep wanting to read all his other stuff. You're gonna seek out what he's done in movies and his bombastic nature, and just how much of a powerful writer and personality he has been in the world of literature.